and welcome back. So I'm carrying on reviewing Robert Chapman's Empire of Normality. Thank you for your comments. I will endeavour to get to them as soon as possible. I'm just carrying on for now, carrying on reviewing from where I left off last time. So I just got up to the bit where Chapman mentions Hayek in relation to the anti-psychiatry movement and Satz, the anti-psychiatrist Satz, who's a very reactionary, right-wing anti-psychiatrist, and his views very much aligned with the economist Hayek. Now, according to Hayek, the so-called virtues of independence, self-reliance, and willingness to bear risks were now less esteemed. Hayek thought that there was a moral decline, that people were becoming worse at dealing with life. And it is this that allowed Satz to see all mental health patients as malingerers who had developed the new concept mental illness to avoid having to take responsibility. And there was a global adoption of Hayek's politics in the 1980s. That is basically when everything went to shit, if you ask me. The rise of Thatcher, the rise of Reagan, aggressive neoliberalism, aggressive austerity, rampant ableism, treating disabled people like absolute shit. Yeah, that's basically when everything went down the toilet, really. And we're still dealing with the aftermath today. It was basically a death throw to if you like, mild socialism, and socialist values which had begun to kind of permeate society after the war in a kind of a sort of welfare consensus. All of that was thrashed to pieces by the rise of neoliberalism and its cold, heartless idea of self-reliance and everyone out for themselves. Now, where am I? Now, Satz was very much influenced by Cartesianism, that's to say Descartes' philosophy of a psycho-medico-dualism. This idea that there was a real, objective bodily medicine juxtaposed against a value-laden psychiatry. Satz saw the body as working or broken machine, and he emphasised dualism in order to preserve the sanctity of the mind that he saw as separate to the body. Satzianism was convenient for framing unwell people as work-shy malingerers, justifying cuts. He saw the correct functioning of a mechanistic body as normal functioning, creating an objective, natural, normative standard. And Chapman says that in that sense, Satz very much brought into the underlying logics of the pathology paradigm. It's just that he was very keen to separate the body from the mind. Now, many anti-psychiatrists believe that the so-called myth of mental illness and psychiatric labels were the core problems, and they were what Marx called idealists. They were taking the power of psychiatric control to come from the belief in the ideas of psychiatry itself. And they thought that denying the reality of mental illness would liberate. But Chapman comes at this from a materialist analysis, and through that materialist analysis, he argues that the conceptions of mental illness is not where the power guiding social control lay. Instead, the way these institutions often harmed people, Chapman argues, were manifestations of the broader neuronormative logics of capitalism. So capitalism is able to use the denial of mental illness to shift the disabled from one form of social control to others. That's and I can kind of see, I can kind of agree with him, at least as far as that goes. Now, Chapman also argues that capital requires us to recognise mental illness just enough to maintain a surplus class, but not enough for it to be forced to grant support where that is seen as costly. The surplus class is very much a key part of Marxist theory. Capitalism needs essentially what's called the reserve army of labour. That can be called upon whenever capital needs more workers. So there's always this reserve army, which is a kind of because under capitalism, not everyone can be in work all of the time. Full employment just wouldn't happen under capitalism. It's not possible under capitalism. The very logic of capitalism itself, the very internal dynamic of capitalism itself, relies on at least some of the population being unemployed, the reserve army, to satisfy the needs of production and, boom and bust and supply and demand and all that. And obviously the disabled form a very big part of this reserve army as well. Chapman talks about the rise of welfare capitalism, particularly after the war, which was championed by the economist Keynes. And he also talks about the rise of the Fordist economic model, and the new Fordist technologies of care and control. He talks about the tightening of neuronormativity in relation to the needs of capital. A much greater portion of the population was now coming to be considered as abnormal, and also increasingly there were new forms of intervention from the earliest years of life. So he talks about Henry Ford, the industrialist, 1910s to 1920s, most well known for the Ford Motor Company, of course, and the assembly line of production. So this resulted in mass-produced, standardised goods that could be sold at low prices to large numbers of people. And Ford cars became the standard across the US, and this led to the widespread use of cars, as they were now cheap and plentiful. The ascent of Fordism took place alongside the adoption of Keynesian economics in the US and UK following the Second World War. Now, Keynes was no Marxist, but he held that a healthy economy required not cutting and saving, but stimulating more demand and more spending. And this was seen as a good way to appease the working classes and to fend off the spread of communism. So that was important as well. There's a lot of pragmatism associated with this, because this was at the time of increasing sort of revolution and, sort of revolutionary sentiment, because of the rise of the Soviet Union and things like that. So there was kind of a sense among sort of capitalists that there was a need to kind of placate the ordinary sort of people, just to give them enough so that they wouldn't get communist ideas into their heads. So there was a sort of pragmatic angle to this as well. During the 50s and 60s, Keynesian government investment at state level and the ascent of Fordism resulted in an economic boom. States and workers were spending more, and more could afford the new goods that were previously reserved for the wealthy, and welfare was increased even for those who couldn't work. So this was the so-called golden age of capitalism, and resulted in modern welfare. And it also brought a new form of alienation, though, relating to capitalist manufacturing of normal desires for consumers and restricted norms for employment, resulting in the production of false needs. Okay, so I'm now going to move over to the next video now to carry on discussing Empire of Normality. So now I'm going to move over to the next video.